Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video we are going to build a full stack application using next.js and MongoDB. As you can see, we are going to build this contact application. So now I have all the data inside this table. As you can see, we have a button here. So if I click this button, I will be redirected to a new page. And using this form, I can add a new contact in my list. Now I'm gonna fill these inputs here. And I'm gonna add my email here, okay? And also we need to have a phone number and the user's address, okay? Now when I click the submit, you can see we have this little loading here, and finally our data will be displayed in the table. You can see we have two buttons here. The first one is delete. If I click this one, you can see after a while my list will be deleted from here on real time. And also when I click this button, I will be redirected back to the form page, and as you can see all the data are printed here. Now using this form I can update my data. As you can see, this text and this text has been changed here. Now if I write something here, and also you can update your phone number and any other inputs that you have here. If I click this update, you can see we have this loading again, and my data has been updated here. To fetch data from the backend, we are going to use Axios with the combination of reac-query. So now let's get started. Okay guys, I'm inside my VS Code. As you can see, we have an empty folder in here, okay? Now let's set up our project. As you can see, I have opened the next.js documentation in here. Just look for next.js.org and you will get this documentation here, okay? Now click this installation in here. If I scroll down, as you can see, we will have this command to install our next.js. So I'm gonna copy this. And inside VS Code, we need to open a new terminal and just paste it here, okay? So to install this in the current directory, just write /. Now hit the enter, okay? We don't need TypeScript here. We are not using ESLint, and we are gonna use Tailwindcss, not source directory. And app router is important because we need to have one page for our form, okay? And also we are not using import alias. Now our app is installing, okay? Okay guys, our app is successfully installed. As you can see, we have all our folders in here. So inside this app folder, we can add our routes for our API and also our pages. So inside this layout, as you can see, it is the structure of our application, and also this page component is our home component. Now I'm gonna delete everything from here, okay? And we are gonna have a simple hello world for now. I'm gonna delete this image from here. Now let's run our application. So I'm gonna open the terminal again and clear the terminal. Now just write npm run dev, okay? Just press the Ctrl and click this link here. Now you can see we have this hello world here. So at first we are going to implement the design of the project, and then we will make the API, okay? So now inside this home component, at first I'm going to change this JS to be JSX, so it will be easy to write JSX inside this component. Now at first we need to have a button that will direct us to our form page. So for that, we are going to have a div here with the class of width 90%. For large screen, width is going to be 70%. MX auto, margin from the top and bottom is going to be 5 rem. Now inside here, we need to have another div for our button, okay? And this button is going to have a link. so this link is going to come from next link. Okay, and we are gonna have a span tag in here and add contact. Okay, now let's style this. So our button is gonna be in the right side, so text right, and we are gonna have an href here, so this link will direct us to add contact page. We are gonna add this page later. Okay, now let's style our button. We are gonna have a class name for that, padding 2, padding y is gonna be 3. We need to have a background color of blue 600. Okay, now let's check. As you can see, we have this button in here, and now we need to have a little border radius here is gonna be MD. Okay, and we need to have an hover effect here and BG blue 700, but we need to have a little opacity. I'm gonna add this 50. Okay, now let's check. As you can see, we have this opacity in here. Alright, now if I click this one, you can see it will be redirected to this 404 page because we don't have this yet. Okay, now let's make our table down here. So make sure to add this inside this parent div. Just down here we need to have another div with the class name of margin top to rim. Inside here we need to have a heading, and our header is gonna be contact app. Okay, we need to have a class name for this, text center to bring it in the middle, and text size is gonna be 3 pixels. Padding from the top and bottom is gonna be 4, and this text is gonna be uppercase. Okay, you can see we have this text here. Down here we need to have a table, so down here we need to have table, and inside this table we need to have table body. Okay, and our table is gonna be width full. Now inside this table body we need to have table row. Inside this table row we need to write our table heads. I'm gonna copy and paste them for first time. Okay, and the first one is gonna be full name. Okay, and we need to have action for our delete and update actions. Okay, I'm gonna make this actions. Now let's see. You can see we have all these table heads in here. Now let's style this. We need to give it a class. Background color is gonna be white, but we need to add a little opacity of 70. Okay, height is going to be 4 rim, and text color is gonna be black with the opacity of 80. Now let's check it. Okay, we have this background color with this black text color. Now down this table head we need to print all our table data. For that we need to have an array of data. In here I'm gonna write contacts is gonna be this empty array. Inside here we need to have an object. So the first one is going to be this full name. Let's say it's gonna be John Doe. It's just an example. Okay, so I'm gonna copy and paste that for 2 times. Now let's map through this contacts. So I'm gonna copy that. Now down here inside this table body, make sure down this table row, map through this contacts dot map. We need to get each and every item along with the index. Okay, and inside here we need to have another component, and I'm gonna call that single contact, and just pass this item to this. Okay, and we need to have a key. Our key is going to be this index. So we don't have this component yet. So to add this component, we need to have a new folder inside the root of my application. I'm gonna call that components. Okay, and we need to have this component inside here, single contact.jsx. Okay, generate this code in here. Now let's import this component here. Okay, seems we have an error, so don't worry, we will fix that. Now inside this single contact, we need to receive this item here, and you can destructure that. So I'm gonna write here this object, and it's coming from item. Now I just simply copy all of them from here, okay, and paste them inside this object. Okay, now inside here we need to have another table row because it is inside table body, okay, and we need to have table data here. So the first one is going to be this full name. As you can see, we have all the data in here. Now let's style our table data here. At first we need to have a class name for this table row. Background is going to be white with the opacity of 40, okay. Height is going to be 3 rem. We need to have a border bottom here, and border color is going to be this black with the opacity of 40, okay, and text align is going to be center. Now let's check it. Okay, we have this all. For the actions, we need to have 2 buttons here, so I'm gonna open another library called React Icons. Now let's install this using this command from here. I'm gonna copy this, open the terminal, okay, and just paste it here. Now let's look for trash button here, okay. I'm gonna choose this one, okay. We have installed this library, and in here just write import, paste it inside this object from React Icons /bs. Make sure to add the first 2 characters, okay. Now let's look for edit icon here. I'm gonna choose this one. Now we need to have another table data here, and inside here we need to have a span tag. Now let's add our icons here, okay. I'm gonna copy and paste this for 2 times. I'm gonna add them inside these span tags, okay. Now let's check. As you can see, we have this icon. Now we need to separate them from each other. So in here we need to have a class name, flex items center, gap is going to be 4, and we need to have a text size of XL, okay. We need to have a little margin top here, so margin top is going to be 1 rem, okay. Now they are in right position. So for each span tag we need to have another class name, and we are gonna have a cursor pointer here. So cursor is gonna be pointer, and we need to have a hover effect for them. Opacity is going to be 70, okay. Now let's check. If I hover over this icon, you can see we have this little opacity. Alright guys, our table is ready. Now let's make our form. So when I click this add contact, I will be redirected to a form page. Now let's make that form page. So inside this app folder, we need to have another folder, and I'm gonna call that add contact. So make sure to name it the same as this one, okay, because this is the name of our route. So inside here, if you wanna make a new page, just write page.jsx. If you write other names, it will not work, okay. Again, generate the React code here. Now let's check if we can open this page or not. So now if I click this add contact, you can see we have this page text, okay. Now let's add our form here, okay. We need to have a parent div, so it will have a class name of width 90%. For medium screen, width is going to be 30 rem, okay. Now mx auto, margin from the top and bottom is going to be 5 rem. We need to have a border, okay, and border color is going to be gray and 500. We need to have a background color of white with the opacity of 10, okay, and we need to have a border radius of MD, and finally padding 6. Okay, now our form is looking good. So at first we need to have a button to bring us back to the main page. Okay, so inside here we need to have a span tag, and the text is going to be go back. Okay, and inside here we need to have a class name. Background is going to be blue 600 with the opacity of 50. Okay, padding 3, again rounded is going to be MD. We need to have a hover effect of BG blue 700 with the opacity of 50 again. Okay, now let's check it. You can see our button is here. Now we need to move that to this side. So to move that, we need to have a position of absolute. Okay, from the left side is going to be 3 rem, top also 3 rem, and finally we need to have a pointer to this button. Okay, our button is here. So now we need to have a function, so this button takes us to the main page. For that we are going to import another function from next.js. It's gonna be router. So I'm gonna call that const router is equal to use router. It's a hook coming from next/navigation. Make sure to make it navigation. Okay, once we have imported this use router hook, you can see we have this error. This is because next.js use server-side rendering by default, so we need to change this to the client side. Up here just write use client. Okay, now you can see we don't have any error. So in here I'm gonna have an onclick here. Okay, and just write router.push and your directory. In this case it's gonna be this home page. Okay, now let's check it. If I click this button, you can see I will be redirected to the home page. Now let's click this add contact. Okay, our button is ready. Now let's work on our form. So down this button we need to have a heading 2, and it's going to be contact form. Okay, now we need to have a class name for that. Padding button is going to be 7. Text center, text size is going to be 2XL. Okay, now let's have our form inputs here. So we need to first have a form tag. I'm gonna delete this action. Now inside here we need to render all our input. So at first I'm gonna add all my input inside an array and just map through them. So up here we need to have a new variable. I'm gonna call that inputs. Inside this array we need to have some objects. At first we need to have a label, and the first label is going to be full name, and we need to have the type of our input. It's going to be text, and we need to have a name for that, and in this case it's going to be full name. And similar to this one, you can add other objects, so I just copy and paste that. Okay, as you can see my input array is ready. Now let's map through that. So inside this form I'm gonna map through these inputs. Okay, dot map. We are gonna get each and every item along with this index, and now we need to print them inside a new component called input. Okay, I'm gonna send this item to this component, and the key is going to be this index. Again, inside this component I'm gonna add this new component. Okay, input.jsx. Now let's import this component from here. As you can see we have all our inputs. Now let's style them. So inside this input I'm gonna receive this item again, and we can do structure. I'm gonna write here const object is gonna coming from item, Again, I'm going to copy everything from here. Now inside this div, I'm going to delete the text here. We need to have a label. So our label is going to be this text, label text. And also we need to have an input. So the type is going to be this type. And also we need to have a name which is equal to this name. Okay, now let's check it. As you can see, we have our label with the inputs, but we need to have a placeholder here. So I'm gonna add here placeholder. It's going to be this template string. Okay, inside here we need to print this name and this dot dot dot. Okay, so now let's check. You can see we have set our placeholders to this name. Alright, now let's style them. So for this div component, we need to have a class name of flex column, and gap is going to be 2. Okay, now they are on top of each other. And for this label, we need to have a class name, and text is going to be small. Okay, now let's style our input. We need to have a class name here. Padding is going to be 3. We need to have a background color of white and with the opacity of 20. Okay, we need to get rid of this outline, and also text is going to be small. Rounded is going to be empty. Now let's check. You can see we have our inputs here. They are looking cool, but we need to have a little space between this label and this input. So for that we need to have a padding top. Okay, and here we need to write padding top is going to be 2. Okay, as you can see we have this space between them. Alright, now let's have a button down here. So again, inside this form we need to have a button here. The type is going to be submit. Okay, and the text is going to be submit also. Now let's style this button. I'm gonna give it a class name. Margin top is going to be Turim, BG blue 600 with the opacity of 50. Okay, width is going to be full. Padding 3. We need to have a border radius of MD and hover effect of BG blue 700 with the opacity of 50. Okay, now let's check. As you can see we have this button, but since our hover effect is not working, let's check it. Okay, because we missed this dash here. Now if I hover over this button, you can see it's working perfectly. Alright guys, our design is ready. Now let's make to the API part. So to make our API, at first we need to set up our database. So in this case we are gonna use MongoDB. I have opened MongoDB Atlas in my browser. Just look for cloud.mongodb.com. Once you have made an account, just click this part, and from here you can make a new project. Okay, so in here just type your project name. So in this case I'm gonna write YouTube contact app. Okay, just click next, and now we need to create this project. If you have any members, you can add your members. If you don't, just click this create project. Okay, now you can see our project is created here, but we need to create a deployment here. Just click this button. Now to deploy this project, you can choose to pay hourly, but in this case we are gonna use this free mode. I'm gonna click this one. Okay, and down here you don't have to set anything, just click this create. Okay, Alright guys, as you can see, this is the username and this is my password. We are going to use this password later on when we connect our database with our backend. Okay, so I'm going to copy this from here, and inside the root of my application we need to have a .env file, environment variable. I'm going to paste this here for now. Okay, now let's go back. Now you can create this user, just click this one. Okay, now down here you can set your IP address, which areas can have access to your database. So in this case I'm gonna write the 000, so people from anywhere can have access to my database. Okay, just click this add entry. Now you can see my IP address has been added. This, okay, we can go back to the database here. Now to connect this database with our application, you need to click this connect here, and from here just click this compass. Okay, as you can see, MongoDB provided us this link, so I'm gonna copy this from here. I'm gonna come back, and inside this environment variable we need to have a variable. Now I'm gonna name this MongoDB, which is equal to this URL that we just have copied this, and just copy this password in here, okay, instead of this password. Now let's see how you can connect our database to our next.js. So in the root of my application we need to have a new folder. I'm gonna call that connect, and inside here we need to have connect.js. okay, now we need to export a function here, and it's gonna be asynchronous function. Okay, now inside here we need to have a try and catch block. Alright, now to connect our database we are gonna use another library called Mongoose. So we need to install that here. In here just write npm install Mongoose. Okay, as you can see, this package has been installed. Now in here we need to import this Mongoose, and now inside this try you need to write await mongoose.connect, and just paste the URL of our MongoDB that we just write inside this .env. We are gonna get this using this process.env dot our variable name. So I'm gonna copy this from here. Now inside this error we are going to throw a new error, and just pass this error dot message here. Okay guys, we have successfully added our connect function in here. Now MongoDB requires us some schemas, so they recognize our input type, so I'm gonna add them in here. Inside the root of my application we need to have a folder. I'm gonna call that contact schema. Inside here we need to have a file contact.js. okay, now at first I'm gonna import Mongoose from Mongoose here, and now we need to store all our schemas inside a variable. So I'm gonna call that contact schema, which is equal to the new mongoose.schema. okay, inside this parentheses we need to have an object of all our inputs. Now let's copy all our inputs name. So I'm gonna go back to this component and single contacts. I'm gonna copy all of them from here and just paste them here. Okay, now let's define our input type. So for the full name, type is going to be string, and this input is required. Okay, now we have the same types for other inputs, so I just copy and paste them. Alright, now if you want to print the time that the user add a new data, just make a new object in here and call that timestamps and set this to be true. Alright, now down here we need to export a new variable. So I'm gonna call that contacts, which is equal to mongoose.models.contacts, okay, or mongoose.model And in here we need to add our collection name. In this case it's gonna be contacts. And now we need to pass our schemas. So I'm gonna copy this variable from here and add this here. Okay, we have successfully added our schemas. Now it is time to make our API. So to make our endpoint, at first inside this app folder we need to have a new folder called API. So all our endpoints will go under this API folder. So I'm gonna have a new folder and call that contacts. Okay, so our API URL is gonna be API/contacts. Now inside here, inside this contacts folder, we need to have a file for our route. It's gonna be route.js. Make sure to name this route, otherwise it won't work. So our first request is going to be a post request. I'm going to add this function here. Make sure to add post with capital letter. It's going to be this arrow function. Now it's going to be asynchronous function, and inside here we need to get this request. So this request will help us get data from the client side. Now inside here we need to have a try and catch block. At first we need to connect our database. So I'm gonna write here await and connect. Make sure to import this from @connect/connect. Okay. Now we need to receive all our inputs name using this request, and they are all coming from await request.json. Okay. Now down here we need to create our first data inside our database. So I'm gonna write here const new contacts, which is equal to await. Now it is time to import our schema name. So it was contacts. Contacts, make sure to import that from @contacts schema/contact .create, and we need to create all of this data. Now down here we need to return a response. It's gonna be next response.json, and we are going to send this new contact. Okay. Now for this error we just throw error.message. Okay guys, we have successfully added our first API. Now we need to test this. So to test our API, we need to install a new extension which is called postman. Just look for postman inside VS Code and install this extension. Okay. Once you have installed this, you will get this icon down here. Click that and make your new HTTP request. As you can see in the left side, we have all our HTTP request type, and in here we can add our URL. So our API URL is going to be this localhost 3000/API/contacts. As you can see, we have this API contacts. Okay. Now in here we need to click this body row, and it's going to be JSON type. Now we need to change our request type here. It's gonna be post. Inside here we need to write all our data. So I'm gonna copy and paste them from here, and we need to add a value for them. Okay. Now if I click the send here, you can see my data has been added inside my database. Now let's check it inside MongoDB. I'm gonna open my browser here, and you need to click this browse collections. Okay. Inside here, as you can see, this is my collections name and this is my module's name here. It's connects. So we have this new data inside this contacts. Okay. So we are done with the post request. Now let's see how we can add that using our form. So I'm gonna close this for now, and in here we need to open our form. At first we need to have some use states here. So I'm gonna write here const form set form, which is equal to use state, and inside here we need to have an object of our input name. So the first one is going to be this full name. Okay, now we need to get our inputs value using this use state hook. So I'm gonna just send this here. Now we are going to receive that inside this reusable input. So inside this input we need to have an on change. So I'm gonna write a new function here, and we need to receive this event. Okay, now down here we need to return set form, and we need to spread this form. Okay, so now we need to get our inputs value using their name. So we need to write here e dot target dot name. We are going to get their e dot target dot value. So we are going to get their values based on their name. Okay, we have already added their names here. So we are going to add this onChange function, and we need to write handle function here. Okay, now let's check if we can get our inputs value. So in here, at first I'm going to have a handle function here. So I'm going to call that handle submit function, which is equal to again this event. Now we need to add this handle submit form to our form here on submit, and add this function here. Inside here, at first we need to prevent the default behavior. As you can see, if I click this, I will have this auto refresh here. So we need to prevent that. So I'm going to write here prevent default, and I'm going to just console log this form here. Okay, now let's check it. I'm going to fill these inputs here. Now if I inspect and click this button here, you can see we could successfully get all our data from our inputs. Okay guys, our form is ready. Now we need to send our form's data to our backend using our API. So we are going to use another library called MERN Stack React-query, which is the new version of reac-query. So I'm going to copy this npm command from here. Now open the terminal, and now just paste this here. And also we are going to use axuse with the combination of this library. Now hit the enter here. Okay, now let's see how we can connect this to our application. If I click this quick start here, as you can see, we need to wrap our application using this query client provider. So since the next.js using server-side rendering by default, we need to add that in a new component. So inside this connect folder, I'm going to have a new component and call that query connect. Okay, .js, and I'm going to generate this React code here. Okay, so at first we need to change this to be use client, and now we are going to import two things in here. The first one is going to be this query client. I'm gonna change this with this div here. Okay, we need to import this. Now inside here we are going to render children. As you can see, we need to send this as client to our application. So I'm gonna copy this from here and paste it down here. Now let's import it. Again, import this from reac-query, and we need to send this as client. Okay, make sure to add this with capital letter here. Okay, now let's import that inside our layout component. So in here we have this layout. Now you can see we have this children here. So we are going to wrap this with our new component, and the component was query connect. Okay, and just paste that inside here. Okay, now let's check if we have any error. As you can see, we don't have any error for now. It means that our React query has been successfully connected to our application. Now let's make our HTTP request. So again, in the root of my application, I need to have a new folder, and I'm gonna call that fetch data. Inside here, we need to have a file, fetch data.js. So our first endpoint was post request. We need to have this function here. I'm gonna call that add data, which is equal to this arrow function. Again, it's gonna be this asynchronous function. Now we need to have a try and catch block here. So we are going to use Axios in here. So I'm gonna write new data, which is equal to await Axios.post, and we need to add our endpoint here. So if you remember, our endpoint was API/contacts. Now we need to send our data. So I'm gonna send this data and receive this data from our form. Okay, now we are gonna send an error message here, and all we need to do is just return this new data. Okay, now let's move to our form component. Now to send data to our API, we are going to use mutation from reac-query. So in here, I'm going to write const. We are going to get this muted, is loading, is error. They are coming from use mutation. Okay, and as you can see, we have some options here. Now let's check them inside documentation. I'm gonna open the documentation here, and as you can see inside this use mutation hook, we need to have our function here, and also this onSuccess function. Now we are going to copy all of them from here. Okay, and we are going to make an object inside this use mutation hook and just paste them inside. Okay, now we need to change this query key, and it's gonna be this contact, and our function is going to be this one. I'm gonna replace this with add data and make sure to import that. Now this is a function. We can send our data using this function. So in here, we need to write muted and just write our form here. Okay, now let's check if our HTTP request is working or not. So in here, I'm going to fill these inputs again. If I click this submit here, you can see we don't have any error. Now let's check that inside our database. So I'm gonna open my database here, and if I refresh it here, as you can see, we have two data. So this is our new data that we just add using our form. Now you can write this as loading also. So in here we have this submit button. So you can say here, if there is loading, we want to print this loading text. Otherwise, we want to print this submit. Okay, you can change this to be submitting. If I click this button, you can see we see this submitting. Okay, now we want to be redirected to our home page when we have submitted our form. So to do that, again we need to use router hook. As you can see, we have already imported that. So I'm gonna copy this here and write router.push this home page. Okay, now let's check it. If I fill the form again and click the submit here, as you can see, I will be redirected to this home page. Okay guys, we are done with the post request. Our next request is going to be get. So we are going to get all the data from backend and display them inside this table. Alright guys, we just pushed the data to our database with the help of next.js post request and react-query use mutation hook. Now let's see how we can display the data in our table. This time we are going to use next.js get request and use query hook from the reac-query. Now let's see how we can make our get request. So I'm gonna open this route again inside this API and contact folder. Now down here we can add our get request function. So I'm gonna export a new function here, and this should be get with capital letter. It's gonna be asynchronous function. Okay, inside here we need to have our try and catch block. Now we need to connect our database here like this one, and if we don't want to connect this over and over again, just delete it from here as well and write it outside. Okay, and now this database is connected to our application, so you don't have to write this over and over again. So now down here we need to have a new variable get contacts, which is equal to this await. Now inside MongoDB we have another method called find. Using that method we can find all the data available inside our database. So we are going to write our schema names here. It was contacts.find. Okay, now using this variable we can get all the data from our database. Now we need to return a new next response here, next response, okay, .json, and we are going to send this get contacts. Okay, for this error message I'm gonna copy this from here and just paste it in here. Okay guys, now we are done with this get request. Now let's see how we can display that inside our table. So now I'm going to open this page here, and down here we need to import a new hook called use-query. So similar to use mutation, we need to have a new variable inside this object, and instead of method function, now we need to have data is loading, is error, and they are all coming from use-query. This use-query will come from this react-query. Okay, now we need to have a parenthesis here, and inside this parenthesis we need to have an object. So at first we need to have our query key in here, and this should be the same as the one that we write inside the add contact. Okay, if you remember, in here we have a query key. Make sure to add this similar to this one. Later on I will show you why this should be similar to each other. Okay, now following that we need to have a function. So we need to have query function, and this query function can be written in here, or we can write that in a separate file. So I'm gonna write here get data. Okay, and similar to the previous function inside this fetch data, we can write it here. So I'm gonna write export const get data, which is equal to async. Okay, this should be async. Inside here we need to have our try and catch block, and now we need to fetch data using axios again, but this time the method is gonna be get. Okay, so I'm gonna write here get contacts is equal to await axios.get. Now we need to write our route here /API/contacts, and that's it. All you need to do is just return this get contacts. Okay, and I'm gonna copy this error message from here and just paste it here. This is our function. Now we need to import this in here. Now our use query is ready. Let's console log this data here. I'm gonna open my browser, and if I refresh the page, you can see we have an error saying that use query should be displayed only on client side, because next.js use server side rendering by default. So I'm gonna change this component to be client component. Okay, you need to write here use client. Now you can see we don't have that error anymore. So I'm gonna inspect the browser here. You can see we have this data array in here. So our data should be this data.data. So I'm gonna just add .data, and if you don't want to see this undefined here, you can just add this question mark before this data. Okay, if I save this file again, now you can see we can get this data immediately. We don't have any undefined before that. Okay, now our data is ready. Now instead of this contacts, I'm gonna get rid of this contacts here. We need to write this data.data. So I'm gonna write this data.data in here, .map. If I refresh the page here, you can see we don't have any error, and instead all our data from our database will be displayed in here. Now you can use this is loading also. So before this data, I can have another table row. Make sure to add this table row, otherwise it will not work. So inside here, I need to have a condition. So I'm gonna say if is loading, then I need to display this table data here, and inside here I'm going to say loading. Okay, otherwise I'm going to display null. Now if I save the file here, and if I refresh the page, you can see we have this loading. We will have this data in here. So now let's add a new data, so we can check if we will have this data available in here. So I'm gonna click this add contacts here. In here I'm going to write a new data, and if I click this submit here, you can see we will have this data immediately in here. And now the reason it is displaying the data on real time without refreshing the page is this onSuccess function in here. So use query will look for this query key, and when the key matches, then our data will be refetched. Okay, and this is the usage of this onSuccess function inside reac-query. Alright guys, we just displayed the data. Now let's see how we can delete a data. So I'm gonna open this route again inside this API, and now we need to have a delete request. So I'm gonna export a new function here, and this time it's gonna be delete async. Now inside here we need to have a try and catch block. Now to delete a contact, we need their ID. So we are going to get their ID here, and the ID is coming from this request. So const ID is equal to request dot next URL dot search params dot get, and we are going to get this ID. Okay, it's going to be search. So now using this next URL, we are going to get this ID. So down here we need to write await. Now using this contacts schema name, contacts dot find by ID and delete. Now we need to pass our ID in here. Okay, so we need to return a new response here, next response dot JSON. Inside this object we need to have a message saying contact is deleted. Okay, and we need to have a status of 200. Okay, now I'm gonna copy this error message from here and just paste it in here. This is how you can make a delete request. Now let's move to the fetch data file in here. So I'm gonna export a new function here, const remove data, which is equal to async. Inside here we need to have a try and catch block, and just write await access.delete, and inside this parentheses you can write your route. So /API /contacts, and we need to write this question mark and ID. So this ID is coming from this next URL, and it's going to be equal to the ID that we received from the client side. So I'm gonna write this ID in here. Okay, for this error message I'm gonna copy and paste this in here. Okay guys, our function is ready. So I'm gonna open this single contacts in here, And as you can see, we have two buttons. The first one is delete and the second one is update button. So in here again we need to have the use mutation hook from reac-query. I'm gonna write here mutate is loading is error, and they are coming from use mutation hook. Make sure to change this component to be client component also. Use client. Okay, now inside here we need to have an object. So at first we need to have a mutation key in here. Our key is going to be inside this array, and this key must be the same as the previous keys. Okay, like we added inside this add contact page. Okay, and following that we need to send our ID. So our ID from the database is this underscore ID. We can structure that from our item here. If you take a look at the database, you can see our ID has this underscore. Okay, now following that we need to have our mutation function here. Mutation function is this function. Okay, remove data. We need to have this arrow function because we need to send our ID using this function. We are going to pass this ID in here. Okay, now our mutate function is ready. So down here in this button we need to have an onClick arrow function, and you need to write mutate and just pass this underscore ID. Okay, and following that, similar to this one, we need to have this onSuccess function. I'm gonna copy this from here. Okay, and we need to import this query client also. It is stored inside this variable. Use query client. Okay, just import this from reac-query. Okay guys, our function is ready. Now let's check if we can delete a contact or not. As you can see, I have my data in here. Now if I click this button, you can see the data will be deleted. I can delete other data, and that's it. Now if I delete all of them from here, you can see we don't have any data. So instead I want to display a message here. So again I'm gonna move to this page. So down this table I'm going to set a condition. So inside this parentheses I'm going to say if data.length is equal to 0, then we are going to display this message here, and the message is going to be inside this div. Okay, and the message will say no data available. Now let's check it. As you can see, we have this message. You can style that. So I'm going to add a class name for this div. Width is going to be full. We need to have a background color white with the opacity of 40 and also a padding of 2. Okay, if I save the file here, now you can see we have no data available. So I can add a new data. Let's add it. I'm gonna fill this form here. As you can see, we have this data in here. You can also use the edge loading. As you can see, we have this edge loading. So I'm gonna add this inside this class name. So I'm gonna change this double quote to be a temporary string. Okay, and inside here we need to set a condition. So I'm going to say if there is edge loading, then I wanna set the text to be read color. Text read and 500. Okay, otherwise I want this to be this empty string. Now let's save it. Now in here, if I click this button, you can see the button will get read color for a while and will be deleted. Okay, guys, we just learned how to add a new contact, how to display that contact, and also how to delete that particular contact. Now it is time to update our contact. So using this button, we are going to update our contact. So at first we need to make that request. The request name is put inside next.js. So inside this route we need to have a new request. This time the request should be put. At first we need to get the data that need to be updated here. So they are coming from request. I'm going to just write them here, equal to await request.json. Okay, I just simply copy and paste this data from here. Alright, now in here we need to have a new variable, updated contact, which is equal to await contacts dot find by id and update. So in here, as you can see, we need to have an id. So we are going to get the id similar to this delete request. I'm going to copy this id from here and just paste it here. Okay, so the first argument is going to be id, and the second one is going to be all the data that need to be updated. So I'm going to copy this from here and just paste it here. Okay, now let's return a new response here. Return next response dot json, and we are going to just pass this updated contact here. I'm going to copy this error message from here and just paste it here. Okay, alright guys, our request is ready. You can test it if you want using postman inside VS Code. Now the request is going to be put, and the URL is going to be localhost 3000 API/contact, and we need to add this question mark ID, which is equal to. Now we need to get an ID from our database. As you can see, we have two data in here. So I'm going to copy the ID of Ali from here. Now I'm going to paste it here. Okay, so inside this body we need to choose row and JSON. Now I'm going to update my full name only. So if you remember, the full name was Ali, but this time I want this to be John. Okay, so if I send this request, as you can see, the request status is 200. Okay, and we just return this Ali. Now let's check inside database. So if I refresh it, as you can see, this full name has been changed to be John, and also inside my UI you can see this full name has been changed to John. Okay, now let's update it using this add contact form. So when I click this button, I want this to redirect me to this add contact form. Okay, and this form should be filled with the data that we are going to update. Now let's see how we can do that. So at first we need to have a context API here. So I'm going to close everything from here. Now in the root of my application, I need to have a new folder called context, and we need to have a component inside context.jsx. Let's generate our function here. It should be context. Up here I'm going to create my context. So I'm going to call that context, which is equal to create context. Okay, it's going to be contact. Now we need to wrap our application with this context.provider, and we just simply get the children from here and wrap the children with this provider. Okay, now we need to have a use state hook here. I'm going to name this update, set update, which is equal to use state, and by default it's going to have this empty object. Okay, now we need to make this component to be client component. Alright, now you can pass this use state hook to our context API using value. You can write here value and make sure to add this inside this double curly braces. Okay, now we need to have a new function, so whenever we need this data we can just import them from that function. So down here I'm going to export a new function here. I'm going to name this context value, which is equal to this arrow function, use context. Okay, and we just pass this context inside. Okay guys, our context API is ready. Now let's wrap our application. So inside this app folder you can open layout. Now we can wrap our children with this context API. Okay, make sure to import that and just wrap the children with this. Okay, as you can see we don't have any error. It means that our context API has been successfully added inside our application. Now let's open our single contact component. So inside this component we have this single contact. As you can see we have this update button in here. So at first we need to import this useState hook from our context API. It was update, which is equal to context value. Okay, and we also need this set update here. So in here we need to have a new function, const update contact. We need to get our data. Okay, and we just set this update to our new data. Okay, now we need to copy this function from here and set an on click here. So our data is going to be this item. So I'm going to pass this item here. Now if I console log this update here, okay, as you can see our update is this empty curly braces by default, but if I click this button you can see we will get this new data. So now when I click this button I want this add contact page to be opened. So to do that we are going to use router again. So now I'm going to import that const router, which is equal to use router. Okay, and make sure to import that from next navigation. Okay, now all we need to do is just write here router.push, and we are going to be pushed to this add contact. Okay, now if I click this button you can see I am redirected to this contact form. Now inside here, inside this page, we need to get that useState hook also. So I'm going to open this page here. Again I'm going to import that. Now in here we need to have a useEffect hook. So at first let's see if we have this data or not. So I just simply console log this update here, and if I inspect this browser here, as you can see we also have this data inside this page. Okay, so now instead of this console log we are going to have a condition here. So if there is some data inside update, we want to set form to our update data. But if there is no data inside this update, we want to set this form all back to this empty string. So I just copy them from here and paste it here, and we want this happened when our update has some data. Now let's check it again. So if I click this button here, as you can see I am redirected to this page, but we don't have the data inside the inputs. That's because our inputs do not have any value. So let's add that value. So down here as you can see we have a reusable input. So I'm gonna open that, and we need to have a value for this. So I'm going to write here value, and the value is going to be based on their name. Now let's check it again. As you can see now all our value has been printed. Okay, now let's work on our update function. So I'm going to duplicate this function here, and I'm going to rename this to be update method here, and this is loading is going to be update loading, and also I can change this to be update error. Okay, it's going to be loading. Now we can actually make that to be asynchronous. So I can add this instead of this method. We can say method async, and I need to change this to be also method async. So now inside this submit function we need to have async. Okay, and inside we need to set a condition. So at first I'm going to delete this, and in here I'm going to say if there is no data inside my update use state hook, I wanna add a new data. It's gonna be method async with the await keyword here. But if there is data, I wanna update my data. Await update method. Okay. Now let's make our function. So it's not going to be add data, it's going to be update data. We have already made the request inside the route file. So inside this fetch data, I'm going to duplicate this function here, and it's going to be update data. And this time we are going to get ID and the data that we are going to change. Okay, so the ID will remain the same, and we are going to send this data, and the request is going to be put request. Okay, now let's import this here. As you can see, we have this update data. Okay, so now inside here we are going to send update dot underscore ID, and our data is going to be form data. We also send this in here, so I'm going to add this arrow function. So we are going to say update dot underscore ID and also this form data. Okay, we don't have any error. So if I click this button here, I will be redirected to this page, and I can change this name. Okay, now if I click the submit here, you can see John Doe. As you can see, my name has been changed to John Doe, and the email also has been changed. It means that our function is working perfectly. I can add a new data. As you can see, my inputs are still filled with the updated data, so we can set the update back to be empty string. So when we have updated our user, we are going to set the update to be back to empty string. Okay, and by the way, you need to change this object to be empty string. Now let's test it again. So this time I'm going to change this Ahmad, and I want this to be Ahmad Ali. Okay, and you can change the phone number or the address. So if I click the submit here, you can see my name has been changed. But if I open this form again, you can see now our inputs are empty. Okay guys, now let's add a new data. Okay, let's submit this. As you can see, we have our new data. Now let's update this. Okay, actually you can change this text. So in here inside this button, as you can see, we have already this condition, but I prefer to add my loading text in a separate variable. So in here I'm going to call that loading text. As you can see, we have two loadings here. So the first one is loading for adding data, and the second one is update loading. So in here we need to say if there is loading, we are going to print this submitting text, but if there is updating loading, we are going to paste this updating, and otherwise it's gonna be this empty string. Now down here I'm going to get rid of this condition, and instead I'm going to write if there is no loading text. It means if our loading is not on, then we are going to say if there is some data inside our update, we want to print update here, otherwise we want to print this submit. Okay, But if we have a loading text, we are going to print this loading text here. Okay, now let's check. As you can see, because we have data inside our update, we have changed this text to be update, and I can change this. Let's say update it or just update it. Okay, now if I click this button, you can see I have this updating loading here, and my user has been updated here. Alright guys, we have successfully finished this application. Now let's check it for the last time. I can add a new data here. Okay, I can delete this data, and also I can update this data. So if I click this button, I can add a new text here, and we need to add this number, update it. Okay, now if I click this update, you can see my data has been updated. Alright guys, that's it. I hope you learned something from this video. So if you want to watch more videos like this, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and give a subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.